We are here. Welcome to the Moynihan Report. I'm your host, Michael Moynihan, and our show today is brought to you by the only principled people, it seems, left in America, our good friends at FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, an organization dedicated to the promotion of free speech and the legal defense of those whose free speech rights are being abrogated. So donate to them and go subscribe to the newsletter. You can do this, by the way. I have my own one. It's thefire.org/Moynihan. So do it there. And then, they know that you're paying attention. All right. If you've been depressed, and I mean sort of properly depressed, not the sort of my pet ferret has lumbago type of depression, when you're confronted with a proper, prolonged, worrying sort of darkness. If not, you've probably dealt with a close friend or family member who has been seized by depression. And in that process, you've doubtless heard the phrase chemical imbalance. It's a tiny little bloodless phrase that allows us to view depression as fixable. It's like a swimming pool. We just need to balance the chemicals. And it allows those afflicted to see themselves as sort of blameless. It's nothing I've done. It's the chemicals. In the past, I myself, I have to admit, have blubbered about my own chemical imbalances. And I, too, have found refuge in the promise of psychopharmacology. But what if everything we think we know about lithium, Prozac, Lexapro, bipolar, borderline personality disorder is either wrong or not exactly as it seems? Well, if you're reading the New York Times last week, you might have seen an article on this very issue, one that caused enough controversy that the New York Times' own guardians of reader mental health, the moderators, shut down the comments. That article was a profile of Laura Delano, the author of Unshrunk, a story of psychiatric treatment resistance. She's also the co-founder of the Inner Compass Institute, and she joins me today. This is the book. Go buy it. Laura, welcome.
Thanks, Michael. It's good to be here.
The New York Times. Can we start there?
Sure.
I don't know if you've had mental health problems in your life, how you deal with having a thing about you, an article about you in the New York Times in which the comments are so vitriolic and so sort of anger-inducing, and there's so much fighting that the Times is like, we actually have to stop this. Tell me why you provoke people this way.
Well, I guess to start, I think I myself would have been one of those vitriolic commenters 15, 16 years ago. So I get it. Mm-hmm. I think my story that I share in this book is it's a scary, even threatening story to consider when you've believed deeply in one way of making sense of your pain and, seeing it, as you said, as chemical imbalance or as something wrong with your basic biology. Yeah. So I get the vitriol. I get the fear. I understand why I'm being called dangerous. And
you don't seem very dangerous, by the way. I was expecting you to kind of come in with spurs and a cowboy hat and 6-shooters on, but not very dangerous.
No, I'm just a good old fashioned believer in informed choice and that, that people should have the right to follow the path that works best for them and be given all the options at their disposal. But even though I make that very clear in my work and in the book, I think for whatever reason, both the coverage itself and certainly the comments maybe didn't fully capture that. And so...
Well, I would say this, in this book, and by the way, I just want you to know that I read the book on Kindle, so this is not a very thumbed copy. I read the book, and you know how you can tell I read the book? The first thing that offended me, you said something about listening to Billy Joel, and I was like, oh my God, her credibility is unwinding right now. But in this book, you detail some really harrowing stuff, and at a certain point, you're on a battery of, drugs. I don't even want to label them because I'll probably be wrong about it. But you're on things like Lexapro and lithium and then stuff for sleeping. And it seems like a chemistry experiment to keep yourself going during the day. And the issue is you walked away from that. At what point did you say, okay, I'm a depressed person? There's also a very harrowing chapter about you attempting suicide. This isn't, my ferret is making me sad thing. This is like serious business. Risky, right? To walk away from this stuff that everyone, these are doctors. They're not cranks. They're people at Harvard and Stanford. They're telling you this stuff is the stuff that's going to help you. When did you say, I don't think that's true?
That's a great question. I mean, it took me 14 years to really connect with that conviction to start listening to myself. I think at the beginning of my journey, when I was first sent to a therapist at age 13 and then soon thereafter sent to a psychiatrist, I knew in my heart that this didn't make sense, that the despair and the anger and the self-injury, that these things were happening for reasons that had to do with the environment that I was in and the pressures that I felt. And so at the very beginning of my journey, I knew in my heart, this path doesn't make sense for me. But I did eventually lose touch with that, knowing, I think, because I felt so much pain so intensely for so many years that I eventually just grew desperate for relief. And so I think that desperation led me to really embrace the psychiatric paradigm wholeheartedly and basically make it my life's purpose. And so when I eventually woke up from that, which is really the best way I can put it, I think in part it was because I had spent so many years of my life deferring to medical experts, translating all of my thoughts and emotions and behaviors into symptoms to be treated. And look where it brought me. It brought me to a totally dysfunctional, disabled, disconnected life in which I basically had the option of like going into the psych ward or going into hospital programs pretty regularly or killing myself.
Pretty regularly.
Oh yeah, it was my job. I mean, the way I put it is I was a professional psychiatric patient through my 20s. It was my job.
Like, by the way, on the website of your publisher, and I presume that you wrote this, is you really refer to yourself as a mental patient.
Yep.
Which I love. I was like, oh, that's taking it back and just saying, I'm a mental patient. I was like, is that a typo? No, you consider yourself a mental patient. You were at one point.
Totally. And there's a whole culture to it. And, when you grow up psychiatrized is another word that I think is important to use here. And it's your whole sense of purpose and your identity. You do come to have a kind of pride in.
I noticed that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's, and I think it makes sense that when there's a void of meaning everywhere else in your life, which may well be why you're struggling in the first place. It was for me. And then suddenly you have this purpose. I'm going to pursue treatment. I'm going to go to my therapist. I'm going to track my symptoms. I'm going to up my meds, talk to my doctor.
You're sort of addicted to being sick, addicted to being mentally. Because the one thing that is a moment in the book that struck me is that I think you might be McLean Hospital in Massachusetts, that you say going in there and you think of the people who don't be ashamed of your mental illness. You just be open about it. And then you have, on the other hand, you going in there and wanting to rattle these things off and to say, here's what I have. And it's kind of a competition to be sort of more mentally ill than the previous person, right?
Yeah. And I think that speaks to this broader cultural moment we're in where there's so much struggle. I mean, young people, especially, rates of suicidal feelings in girls, for example, higher than ever before. Adults too. I mean, there's so much suffering right now in our culture for so many reasons, complicated reasons. And yet we've given a monopoly to this medicalized, kind of pharmaceuticalized model of the mental health industry for making sense of all of that. And so when you're in pain and you want to feel seen and understood and validated, when you want to fucking break because you're tired of trying so hard, and then suddenly here's this like enticing idea of like, just relax. You're not a bad person. You're not lazy. You're not weak. You're not a slut. You're not a fuck up. You're sick, and we're going to take care of you. It's a really compelling promise that I certainly found myself swept up in. And when that becomes the world you live in, when you're going to treatment all the time, it does become, like you said, there is a bit of a competition there because you're so hungry to feel understood. And the only way you feel understood is through medicalizing yourself and having all these professionals around you validate how sick you are.
Can you explain to our viewers, and we are going to have some people come in and ask some questions, and this is a topic that a lot of people have questions on. Tariffs, less so. This is like rock, paper, scissors. This is paper comes to this is better than tariffs. And so give people a sense. And sometimes I'm reading this, I'm thinking about it in like the pharmacology way. And I step back and say, okay, so what is it to be Laura Delano in high school? For viewers out there that might have some kinship with you, what are those thoughts like? I mean, is it, I'm not going to succeed. I grew up in a very competitive environment and I don't feel up to it. What are those things that are actually gripping you in making you a depressive?
I think a lot of it was just a quest for meaning. I was participating in all these performative rituals of school and sport. And I had this void of this kind of gaping hole in me of like, why? What is this all for?
Yeah.
I didn't happen to find my way to philosophy or any kind of spiritual writings. I had no reference point to turn to try to kind of grapple with like, what's the point in being here? You know,
you ultimately find your way to postmodernism, which is its own problem.
Don't even get me started on the rabbit hole there.
No, Foucault is not your friend.
And he was my first kind of discovery of it. Yeah, don't even get me started on that. And so I think in high school I felt trapped in this performative life. And whether, you were in an elite prep school like I was, or you're in a public school, it's like whatever setting you're in, when you're a young person and you're spending all day, every day, going through these rote, meaningless rituals of homework and papers and whatever else, I think for a lot of young people, there's this nagging sense of like, what is this all for? So that I can get into college and so that I could then get a job. And so then what's the point? And I had that dis-ease in me, but I didn't have a space to really talk about that or explore that anywhere. And that might be on me. Maybe there was, I just didn't see it. But I ended up just feeling more and more convinced like something must be really fucking wrong with me because like I am struggling to like want to be alive because what's the point?
There's a chapter in this book and I don't have my glasses on so I can pretend that I can see this, but it's, is it my suicide? Is that what you, obviously it's the one thing we're thankful that you're a total failure at because you're sitting across me. Your suicide was a failure. It's a pretty gripping scene. Talk a little bit about that, and how you came to that point. What is the point, that inflection point? Because I know you thought about it, the suicidal ideation, which is the phrase people use. It was always kind of there. But how does it go from being there to being the solution?
Well, through my 20s, so I managed to graduate from college after taking a year off, being hospitalized. After finishing college, though, things really fell apart through my 20s. And so with each passing year, my life just felt emptier and more disconnected. I couldn't hold down jobs. I was totally dependent on my family. I was in a series of really dysfunctional relationships. I had no friendships, just year after year after year of life getting more and more unlivable. And eventually my psychiatrist told me, listen, basically like, you're just so sick, Laura, you have treatment resistant bipolar disorder, which basically meant, you're so defective, your biology is so defective that even all of our great treatments can't make a dent on the progression of your disease.
And that's the phrase, treatment resistant.
It's
a slightly medicalized way of saying you're totally fucked, right?
Basically. And it's also a way of course, preserving the beneficence of the medications. Sure. Because if you feel helped on psychiatric drugs, then it's because the drugs have worked. But if you don't feel helped or you feel worse, it's not because the drugs didn't work or maybe had some adverse effects. It's because you were just so sick that the drugs couldn't had worked their magic on you. So that was the message that I got, which basically led me to conclude, like, my God, if I'm so defective that this is all that's in store for me, I'm just going to keep getting worse. And, what's the point in living anymore? Yeah. And so that choice to kill myself, it came like you said, like I'd had it in the back of my mind through my 20s. It was this, I call it my dark companion. It was always there. I always knew I can turn to it. And just after a particular kind of difficult conversation with my parents, I go into it in the book, where I realized I'm causing my family all this pain. Look what I've put everyone through. And here I am with this defective treatment-resistant mental illness. Like the time has come. And it just kind of in that moment became the most logical thing.
To you, though, because I mean, obviously, the problem with that is you're going to cause them an infinite amount of future pain.
Totally. I mean, in hindsight, I can look back and see all the illogical problems with it. But if you think about it, there was a logic to that decision. The story that I had been taught to believe about myself was a story about a life that wasn't worth living. And of course, that's the problem here, is that I was believing in a false story of self. And so was my family and the whole kind of family system that had grown around me as this dysfunctional mental patient. And so, I'm really grateful that I failed at killing myself and that I eventually was able to find my way to questioning this whole paradigm that I had been such a faithful believer in. But yeah, to this day, that might sound controversial, but I have deep respect for that choice I made to kill myself. That's not me saying I think anyone should kill themselves ever, but I get it. I get why I reached that point.
Explain that a little more. I get it too, but respect. You respect the choice to end your own life.
Given what I believed about myself, that I had this treatment-resistant mental illness and that psychiatry had tried all its drugs on me, and here I am more fucked up than ever before, it was logical for me to conclude that death was a better option than just more of that.
Yeah.
So, of course, that story was a bullshit story, and I'm really glad I didn't die. And I think...
But were you disappointed when you woke up?
Oh my gosh. I get emotional thinking about it. I remember how outraged I was that I was still here. And actually...
Wait, that's an interesting word choice. Outraged. You're not disappointed. You were outraged.
Yeah. I was so mad.
Yeah.
I was so mad. And I didn't mention this in the book, but my dad, many years later, God, it gets me emotional thinking about it. When he shared with me, when he saw that reaction that I had after I came out of the coma, he had this momentary realization, my God, did I make a mistake in saving her? I mean, can you imagine being a father who loved your daughter so much? The last thing you want is for your daughter to be dead. And yet he saw how hopeless and desperate I was to be alive, that he actually for a moment wondered if he had made a mistake. Of course, all these years later, we're like, my God, that was a wild life chapter.
Yeah, but this happened fairly recently too, with a family of people who had been kidnapped on October 7th, saying that I hope that they actually are dead and they're not in a tunnel somewhere being just tortured. That very existence is torture. I mean, you understand that in the sense that, on paper, it sounds unbearably cruel. But when you're thinking about the alleviation of somebody's pain,
especially your child, yeah.
Right. That's so the medications. I mean, this is where the book becomes controversial. Let's get into the controversy of it.
Let's do it.
Because the drugs don't work, which is a very good song too. If you've ever heard the song, The Drugs Don't Work. But your argument here is what? Explain to people who haven't read this book, and people out there might have gone through this thing and that said, like, these drugs help me out. Countless numbers of people. You go on Reddit. I'm, looking at the reaction to this book, and there's Reddit thread after Reddit thread of people saying, look, this is me. I was saved by this stuff. It is dangerous, as you said, that people point out that she's a danger by telling people that they shouldn't be on these drugs, SSRIs, et cetera. What do you make of that argument?
Well, the first thing I would say is that I have literally never anywhere in my entire life said or written that I don't think anyone should take these drugs or that people should come off of these drugs. I mean, something happens when people hear people hear me share my own personal story. I'm literally just talking about my own experience and what I learned. I'm not saying anything about anyone else. Somehow people hear that as me saying, no one else should take these drugs, which I completely don't believe. And I actually...
But the foundation that you and your husband started, that's not encouraging people to get off?
No. Oh my goodness, no. Our mission is to help people make more informed choices about these.
But that's not just some loaded phrase that basically says, we're going to make them, it kind of sounds political, like, oh, we're just going to make them. But actually, that's what we're doing, subterranean. We're trying to get them off of these things.
Well, we don't have, basically all we provide is information that's just sitting there on our website. And then we have a mutual aid community where people, in a similar way to AA, people who are going through similar struggles, many of them are on medications. Many of them are in the process of coming off them. Many of them are off them. They're just connecting and supporting one another. We don't allow any personal advice. No one is telling anyone what to do. I think that I truly actually, I don't think I would agree with that song. I do think these drugs can feel helpful to many people. Where I get what my book is really about is the stories that our society believes about these drugs are the problem here. When you are being told you have a chemical imbalance in your brain, and just like someone with, diabetes needs insulin, you need this antidepressant, which the word itself implies it's going to act against your depression.
Correct. Yeah.
That is marketing language. There's no scientific basis to any of that statement. But instead, if you're told this is a psychoactive drug and we don't really know a lot about it, the trials that got these drugs approved were 6 to 8 weeks in length. So we don't really have any knowledge about long-term use, but they may have effects on you that will feel helpful. For example, if you get panic attacks when you fly in an airplane, like taking a Xanax might help. I think we need...
Might.
Yeah, it's.
I do sometimes. Sometimes I've done that. Yeah.
These drugs can be really helpful,
Sure.
Certainly in the short term. So for me, it's about, are people being given reliable information and in a language that's actually straightforward and honest about what they are? And I make the case in my book that I don't think we have been. Again, that's not me saying no one should take these drugs, but I think we all have a right to be given good information about them, and then we decide from there if it makes sense, which for some people it will, but for others, it won't.
All right. So we're talking about how you resisted this and whether that's applicable to other people, because as we were saying before the break, the anger, man, don't tell me what to do. This stuff works for me. Are there ever any comments? Like, do you read the New York Times comments? Do you actually go through those?
I briefly skimmed them, but I didn't go in depth.
Why did you even skim them? What is wrong with you? You can take this thing. I can't read any comments by myself. It hurts my feelings. I can't do it. Is there any time that somebody, I know you've read some of the criticism of the book. The New York Times gave it a good notice, a good review, but had a couple of criticisms in there too. Is there any of that you say, okay, they have a point?
Well, I think there are plenty of legitimate critiques to have of me, my story, my book.
Mm-hmm.
Because I didn't read the comments closely, I can't come.
Yeah.
Nothing comes to mind in terms of anything specific, but
the idea is that they all think that you want everybody off this stuff. And if you do that, lots of people die.
Yeah. And again, I understand why people are so terrified at the prospect of a story of someone who decided to leave this all behind. Yeah. I think, if someone actually sits down and reads my book, which I hope your listeners will, because the way my story is represented in the various coverage it's had so far isn't necessarily the whole picture. I think people will find that really what I am an advocate of is personal autonomy and choice, and that, who am I to think that I know what anyone else needs or should have, what I think will work for them or what won't work for them. Life is so complicated and complex. And I think part of the challenge is that people want a kind of one size fits all answer or explanation. And so when a story comes out that calls into question that, kind of singular paradigm of care, it's almost, hard to kind of comprehend because our culture is so, there's such a monopoly in our culture, in our sense-making apparatus of what it means to be human by the mental health industry today, that suffering is a medical thing that needs professional intervention. All I'm really proposing in my book is that for some people that might be true, but there are so many other ways to make sense of these difficulties, to get support, and there should be space made in our culture to have that conversation.
And it's also not conspiratorial just on its face to say that this is a multi-billion dollar industry. And when you have an industry that is printing money in the way that it does, there is obviously, as economists say, the incentives are sometimes going in the wrong direction, right? I mean, the incentives here are to get people on pills. Look, I'm not saying that I agree with this or not. I haven't gone deep into it. I've read your book. I love the book. The personal story is fantastic. I don't know where this stuff is true and where it isn't true. Not in your book, but just when people talk about this, we are, it seems, over-medicated, right? What was it? During COVID, we had 10% of the population that were taking SSRIs or some form of antidepressant. That seems wrong to me. And I don't know why. I'll be totally frank about this. The instinct that I have on that is that the easiest answer, 10% of the population cannot be people that if you take them off of these drugs, they will be suicidal. They will spin out and their lives will be lost. It seems that, if you have a little fluctuation in happiness, that this is the solution. I mean, am I wrong in thinking that you don't want that personally? Not to the people in the world, people that come to your clinic. Do you want that to kind of go away or to be minimized or fewer people to be prescribed, say Prozac when they're having a hard time?
Well, I think what I want is for people to have access to good information, which we don't have access to right now.
What would you consider good information about, say, Prozac?
So I guess, say you are coming up against a difficult chapter in your life. You're feeling despair, having a hard time getting out of bed, the classic kind of symptoms of depression. To me, an informed choice would be, first of all, seeing multiple visible options on your horizon for help so that it doesn't only seem that the one source of help you can get is a mental health professional and pills. So seeing other options, maybe, addressing your nutrition, maybe you have some kind of hormonal imbalance going on. Maybe you are in a relationship that has issues and that's having a serious impact on your life. Maybe something with work, other stressors, recent loss, trauma. I mean, there's so many factors at play in what lead people to struggle. So I think for starters, that we make space for more realms of help in our culture so that it isn't only a psychiatrist or other kind of mental health professional and pills. That's the starting point for me with choice. Then beyond that, let's say you do decide you still want to go to a psychiatrist, which you should totally have the right to still do. Then it's about being really clear that, this depression you're feeling, we don't actually have any evidence to suggest that you have a pathology in your brain here. The drugs that I'm going to give you are marketed as antidepressants, but really they have vast effects on your various neurotransmitter systems. We've only studied them for an average of 6 to 8 weeks before they get approved. We've never studied them in combination with other psychiatric drugs you might be on. We don't really have a strong evidence base for long-term outcomes. Oh, and by the way, if you take this drug for more than a few weeks, your central nervous system may well become physically dependent on this drug so that down the line, if you want to come off of it, you're going to have a hell of a hard time.
And there's no controversy about this. It's incredibly difficult to get off of them, right?
You don't think there's controversy around that?
There is? Oh my God. Did I not do my homework on this? I'm talking personal. I got off these things at one point and good Lord, it was crazy. It was, I was like, wow, that's really mixed up my brain.
But Michael, I think at a broader cultural level, we don't yet fully accept this. And when you see in the drug labels that do acknowledge dependence and discontinuation syndrome is what they call it. That's like a kind of clever way to, it's a bit euphemistic. Usually the labels will kind of say, oh, it might last a couple of weeks. discontinuation syndrome. So I think there's a huge lag between the reality of how hard it can be to get off of these drugs and what doctors are taught and what information the general public is given about them. And so I think that, and those examples that I just gave are barely scratching the surface of what informed choice is, but that's a good starting point. And I think especially for girls and young women who may one day want to have a baby, I was never told, if you start these drugs, you might need a few years to taper off them, because some people need to taper literally over years because going any faster than that is too disruptive. You make sure you factor that in to any planning you might want to do.
I found this out recently, by the way. I found out recently that there are people who specialize in, if you're going to plan on getting pregnant, to taper over time. That is specifically for getting off particular drugs in the process of getting pregnant. The existence of that job slightly frightened me. That is something that we need. And it seems logical that we do. I mean, let's go back to you being 14 and you seeing your first psychiatrist. Did you change the names in the book, by the way?
All the names but one, which I had to use the real name because I also reference his research.
Okay. I think it was Anuja was the one that you talked about. If you were to go back in time and what you know now, think about how you felt then and how you felt when you were in high school. And there's parts of this book, by the way, we grew up in a similar milieu in the sense that we're Northeast, right? And I see these parties of drinking and doing stupid stuff. I was like, oh, it's just like my high school experience. Seems rather normal, but you're suffering through all of this. How would you, knowing what you know now, go back and treat that? If you have the skepticism that you have about psychiatry, about certain modes of psychiatry and of pharmaceuticals, like how would you wish that your parents would have handled that, you could have handled that? Because it requires a lot of off-the-shelf education, which is not, look, a pill, your parents are working, and, to address at the same time, and let's do this at the same time, because you've been criticized for it, is that you come from a background in which this is not a terribly difficult thing for you, because you come from what people would say, wealth and privilege. I don't know why you need both, but you come from a good background and your parents can pay for the stuff. You address it in the book. But how do you do that if you don't have that knowledge and you don't have the resources to get that knowledge, the time to get that knowledge, and you're a young girl? The drug seemed like a logical choice too.
I agreed. I think they made this decision my parents made and the decision that psychiatrist made to medicate me made total sense given the trajectories through life that they each had, the logic that they were each operating within. And the questions you raise are really good ones. And I don't have an answer to any of them because they're so big and important. I do know
because your brain is so different at 14 than it is today. You went to university, you've had a life, you've learned so much. When you're a 14-year-old, how do you get through to them to say, okay, let's take a breath, and here's a series of things that we can do to try to make this better? Are young people, capable of that, I suppose is the question.
And I don't know. I don't know if they are. I don't know if anyone could have, people ask me this question often, and the only answer I've really come up with that actually resonates with me is that perhaps if I had been in an environment where other young people were openly talking about their struggles without medicalizing them, just talking about how crazy it is to go to this all-girls private school with all these expectations. What's the point to all of this bullshit? If I had seen other young people talking about that, if I had had older girls that I could look up to who'd kind of been through their own dark nights of the soul, maybe if I found my way to some philosophy or spiritual texts, I think those might have been the only sources of support, comfort, kind of intellectual, but I think honestly, really a lot of this does come down to parents. When you're talking about medicating children, kids can't make choices legally around this stuff. So I do think a lot of this comes down to helping parents get informed about all of these issues and then helping parents get better support for just to help them feel more empowered and capable in their parenting. Because I've heard from so many parents over the years who reach out to me and say, my God, my, 20-something-year-old kid or my 30-something-year-old kid who I 10 years ago sent to a psychiatrist because I didn't know what else to do. Now they're disabled. They're living with me. They haven't been able to take care of themselves. How do I help them get out of this mess? A lot of them will say, back at the beginning of these struggles that my child was having, we felt pressured to go to a professional. We felt like it was being irresponsible of us to try to support our kid ourselves or to turn to other families. Yeah. We didn't even have other families we could have turned to if we had wanted to. And so I do think a lot of this is about helping families help each other, helping fellow parents mentor and support each other. And again, this isn't me saying never go to a therapist. I'm not anti-therapy. Mm-hmm. Just it's about options. There need to be other visible options beyond just a mental health professional and pills. Again, take those if that feels right for you and that's helpful for you. That's great.
Did you ever have the moment when you have a 4-year-old? Mm-hmm. Did you ever have the moment prior to your child being born saying, I'm never going to be the parent that puts them in front of the TV and then they're 2 years old and like, get in front of the fucking TV. I have work to do. I mean, that's what the pills are like to me in some ways. It's like, there's a long way of doing this, sitting down and playing with the child and being like, oh, I'm going to calm you down because I have work to do. Or just the palliative of just do that. And it makes a certain amount of sense that people would use those options and maybe overuse those options. All right, we're going to go to people shortly. I want to ask you one more thing before we do. And it is just about the place we are in right now as a culture, as a country. This show, thankfully, is sponsored by our friends at FIRE, and Greg Lukianoff, president of FIRE, has written really movingly on this issue of his struggles with mental health and, what the situation is for young people today. And as you mentioned, it really affects girls in a worse way. And, Jonathan Haidt, his co-author on his book, The Coddling of the American Mind, has written about phones and social media. It seems to be a lot worse now than it was when you were in high school, right? Mm-hmm. And it also seems that people are talking about mental health almost in a way that feels cheap to me on Instagram and other things, just kind of fetishizing it in a way. How are we as a country now? And is it depress you in some way that it seems like from, if you agree with me, it seems like it's worse. It seems like there's no good options for anyone.
I think we are, I don't know how much worse it could get before it can only get better. I mean, I actually feel quite optimistic that we have so medicalized what it means to be human that it's to the point of absurdity. And it might well take getting to the point of absurdity for people to step back and say, wow, does this actually really make sense? To be encouraging all these teenage girls who are going through puberty, struggling with all the struggles that come with growing up, to tell them they have lifelong incurable brain diseases that need pills. I mean, I think we're reaching a point of readiness to at least pause, step back for a minute and say, like, does this actually make sense? And we have to, because 1 in 4 American adults are on a psych drug at this point. 1 in 10 kids. I mean, we have an epidemic here, and we have an epidemic of suffering at the same time as we have more people than ever before receiving mental health treatment. So something isn't making sense here. Yeah. And I don't have a clear answer as to what the heck to do about it, but we have to stop as a culture and pause and actually start to engage meaningfully and have difficult conversations. To go back to what you were saying about that family, the parents who are working and they're stressed, their kid has a behavior problem at school and at home, just feels easier to give them a stimulant. Really, it's about that school system. It's about the fact that both parents have to work to pay the mortgage. Like this is really about such bigger systemic issues, and the medicating of kids and the quick fix solution so many of us turn to, I think, is a symptom of these deeper issues that are going to be really messy.
Well, I think the phones are a problem. I was at a restaurant the other day, and there were 4 teenage girls that went to the bathroom together, and they all went in with their phones, 4 of them. They came out all on their phones, and I was like, it's over. Just please destroy us now. Like the meteor, sweet meteor of death hit us. All right. We're going to talk to you now. And as you know, I have to tell you the rules. Be normal humans. Just don't be a jerk if you feel like being a jerk. No. Mara, you're not going to be a jerk. You're first up.
Hi. Hi, Laura. It's nice to see you. I read your article when it came out, I think maybe 2017, 2018. And it was really instrumental in my own process. I also was a teenage girl when I started medications. I grew up in the 80s, so Prozac was the first drug. It came out during the time when I was a teenager. And I've had a long history with this system and also was in the process of leaving it when your article came out. So it was a really critical time for me. I've now been off medication for 7 years. I think I was on and off for almost 30 years. And I also had a parent who suffered immensely, who was a Vietnam War veteran and had a lot of issues. So I'm familiar with the system as both patient and also as an advocate for my own parent. I guess my question to you is, I love what you said about the social system that we're in, everything about the phones, everything about just the lack of support and the lack of conversation around suffering and how we deal with suffering as a culture. In particular, I was wondering, how do you answer questions about, or I don't know, how do you navigate conversations with people? Because in my life, like everyone I know is on medication still, every single person. And this was something I had to do completely by myself. I did not have support in any way, except for these groups, except for these kinds of, and which at the time for me, it was like, well, it can't be any more dangerous than the system I've already been in. There were so many, atrocious things that went down. So that's just kind of my question is, how do you approach this kind of, this world that we're living in, which is just like all the rise of like kids getting on TikTok and talking about their pathologies and their identities with ADHD and autism, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you, Mark. Good question.
Yeah, thank you so much and that is really meaningful to hear. Are you talking about the New Yorker profile of me? Yeah, that means a lot to hear. And thanks for all you shared. I think a lot of this is about tapping into needed compassion for, all those angry people who have been emailing me and blowing up my comments on my social media profile, writing angry 1-star reviews where I'm like, oh, they definitely haven't read my book. For me, it starts with stepping into their shoes and seeing this through their eyes and really trying to understand from a place of empathy and compassion why they might be so resistant, so angry, so upset by me just sharing my own story. And then connecting with them at that level. Because I don't think change is going to happen by, sharing statistics and information and science. And the science, in many ways, you could say, is on our side when it comes to calling into question the long-term safety and effectiveness of these drugs. But I don't think that's how change is going to happen. I think it's really about being compassionate with people and creating opportunities for them to identify with what you've gone through. I think storytelling is a huge piece of how we're going to help our society heal and really start to have these difficult conversations about suffering and kind of help reclaim language around talking about suffering so that it isn't just medical and, clinical in nature anymore. But it takes a lot of courage to speak your own truth, what you've been through. And I think I'm always like trying to get to my heart, especially when it's people who are most pissed off at me.
Thank you, Mara. I don't suspect in the entire lifetime of this show that anyone will call in. Do if you feel this way and say, you, Michael Moynihan, I read something you wrote and you changed my life. It's usually like, wow, you're a fucking moron. So that is amazing to sit next to somebody who gets calls. The first call too. All right. Maybe it didn't change Alex's life. Alex, you're up next.
Hi. So my question is, I live in a similar area. I'm in New Canaan, Connecticut. So I've noticed that a ton of my friends have kind of been looking at all the different medications that they've been on since they're 14. So there's birth control, there's antidepressants, there's a host of other kind of cocktails that they've been on, and slowly but surely they've tried to come off of some. And now, but also they're adding Botox, they're adding Ozempic, they're adding other mixtures of cocktails that are affecting their brainwaves and things like that, and not realizing that it's all kind of in the same soup of medicalization to use quick fixes. And my question to you is kind of, how do you think the Ozempic part of society right now interweaves with this? And do you think a lot of people will go on Ozempic because I'm going to lose weight, then I'm going to feel better about myself, then I'm not going to need to be on my antidepressant. But really, at the end of the day, it's just adding more to the soup. So I guess my question is about Ozempic, how it fits into all of this, and then, what you think about it.
Alex, can I ask you a quick question? You don't have to be specific in any way, but when all of your friends were ticking off the drugs they'd been taking since they were 14, do you find yourself in the same group that I was ticking off a bunch of drugs too, or did you manage to avoid that?
No, I grew up in a really traditional Italian family, Catholic family. So I was raised like very, I don't know how you say, traditional and conservative. And so luckily or whatever, it did not find myself, but I'm worried about my friends. I also want to be able to understand them and not feel like I'm preachy that I haven't been on these things, and to understand where they're coming from too. So
Alex, the non-preachy Italian, what do you make of the question?
It's a really interesting question. And I do think there are a lot of overlaps in the Ozempic story and the psychiatric drug story. This idea of, to put it bluntly, a quick fix. And that I think, just as the struggles that so many people have with weight are so often kind of individualized, put upon them, like, oh, you lack willpower, or you lack discipline, or, you have a bad diet, whatever stories people get told about why they are having the struggles they're having. No, really, the story is, we live in our modern industrialized society. We live under the weight of industries that do not necessarily have human well-being in mind. The industries that are feeding us, the industries that are, selling us all kinds of products to use in and on our bodies. And so I think similarly, the numbers of people who are struggling with anxiety, depression, even the more extreme serious mental illness categories too, I think so much of their struggles are actually rooted in these deeper, more socioeconomic, political, cultural issues. But it enables the avoidance of that deeper, more difficult conversation by saying, oh no, just here's a pill to help you address your individual problem, whether it's with your body or with your mind. So I think there are a lot of parallels. And again, I think it's about informed choice, just like with curiosity, asking your friends, like, have you taken a close look at the trials that got Ozempic approved, which I haven't myself done, but I imagine, as it was quite enlightening for me to actually go back and read the complete drug labels for each drug I was on and have my mind blown. Like, what do you mean this drug I took for 7 years was approved on the basis of 2 trials that lasted a few weeks each? I imagine similar aha moments might happen for people looking into how Ozempic was approved too. But again, it's like, it gets back to it's really messy and complicated. And it's never about just us as individuals. It's always about us in relationship to this culture around us. But that's not a conversation that a lot of people want to make time to have.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of pressure from a lot of different industries and a lot of people who have vested interests in particular things. And that's what I keep coming back to, that idea of incentives. I don't know that those incentives have been acted on. I don't know that in the case of Ozempic or Wegovy or whatever the hell it's called, that there are people that are pushing this because they serve to benefit from it. I don't know if that's true. But the one thing about these Ozempic drugs, which I've noticed, is a trickle of stories about potential long-term effects. And I'm a type 1 diabetic, and this is a drug that was created for diabetics. And you see these kind of, other I couldn't take this drug. It would lower my blood sugar too much. I wouldn't be able to function if I was on any of these drugs. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what will happen. We are a little blithe about what could potentially happen with some of these things that haven't been tested or been out there in the real world for a long time. All right. The great thing about this, by the way, this conversation is that usually you're talking about politics with me, and it's just a bunch of nerdy boys. Another girl. Isn't that amazing? Look at this. We should do this every week. We have Sherry next up, presuming that Sherry is a lady. Sherry, are you there? Maybe she's so horrified by that introduction.
There we go.
Oh, there we go. Sherry,
here.
there? All right.
Yeah, my dog started barking.
That's
of course. So Laura, thank you so much for your book. I started reading it. I haven't finished it, but one of the things I really love about it is it just brings me right back into the moment of the late 90s, early 2000s, just the culture and the stories that we have about mental illness at that time. Now, I've experienced very bad adverse effects from SSRIs. So I really appreciate a lot of the work that you're doing. One of the things I wonder about is reading all of the information you've found, all of the studies that you've probably come across that showed that there really wasn't much effort put into understanding these drugs. And where do you draw the line in your own personal skepticism in the medical industry with this? How do you not become someone who's like using crystals? And I know you mentioned how you you even found on the opposite side with like alternative medicine that there's a lot of grift there too.
Yeah, that's the new grift. Yeah.
It's a great question. Sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, thanks so much, first of all, for reading my book. It's meaningful it's wild. It's my book. I have a book.
Yeah, you do.
I have a fucking book. I wrote a book.
Yeah, and people are saying nice things about it on this. We're going to get some haters in there too. We'll find one.
I definitely have gone on my own kind of broader journey with just stepping back to rethink so many old stories I used to tell myself about my body and about health and well-being. And, one area, for example, is I ended up deciding to give birth at home. That was similar to my views on psychiatric drugs. I think a woman should have the right to give birth wherever she feels most in her power, most supported, most safe. For me, it's about choice. And after spending many years reading and learning and reflecting on birth, for me, what felt right was having a non-medical, demedicalized birth experience. But again, that's not me saying no women should ever give birth in a hospital. So yeah, I have, it's there's been a blossoming beyond psych drugs in terms of the rethinking I've done for myself. And yeah, it's just my own, that's just me. But I'm like, all the power to where other people draw their own lines. But I realized after the psych drug kind of experience and then finding my way to a critique of the pill, the so-called pill, which I feel quite strongly about and has, the ways that women have been taught to view the pill as a path to our liberation and our empowerment. And, this idea that we can transcend our biology and basically like play God over our reproduction and with a pharmaceutical product that has profound risks to it, especially over the long term. I decided for myself to, after being on the pill for 16 years, that I didn't want to be on it anymore. And that was a whole recovery process of itself, in itself that my body had to recover from. Again, I'm not anti-pill, but I certainly wasn't given good information about it when I was put on it as a teenager who was starving herself and not getting her period. And that was the reason to put me on it for 16 years, basically.
Sherry, thanks for the question. I just want to add one thing to it. You make a very good point, because we're seeing a lot of this right now with people who have been skeptical, and rightly skeptical, of certain things in the media's coverage of things, whether it was something like, Russiagate, which we were promised was going to, bring down the government and blow our minds and show us that we were being ruled by the Kremlin, to, 100 other things, COVID being a huge one, is that my worry about this is precisely, I don't know if it was your worry, but it's your question, is precisely the worry that we overcorrect with skepticism. That is the hardest thing to do. And that is the thing that one needs to do as a consumer of the news or consumer of, medical advice, is not to overcorrect. Because I look on Twitter now and I see people that I remember being rightly skeptical of certain things, school closures, et cetera, have now gone around the bend. And there's a very, very rich culture of conspiracy that has popped up on the internet these days. So be careful of it. So it's a good question. Thank you for asking it. I have going to go to one final one because we have a guy named Roger, and Roger is not going to ask a girly question because I don't understand. You're talking about the pill. I don't know. You could be right. You could be wrong. I have no idea. It was a liberation for me, Laura, when people discovered the pill. Roger, you there?
Yeah, thank you. First, congratulations on the great presentation. It's a high level, to be sure. When I heard your presentation, I couldn't help but thinking about Thomas Szasz, when the 1960s was huge in mental health. I wrote a famous book, The Myth of Mental Illness, in which he advocated against psychotropic drugs and psychiatric centers. And I wondered what your thoughts are about him. Secondly, I once worked at a psychiatric hospital many years ago. And what I found was two things. Number one, patients were diagnosed based on the interests of a particular psychiatrist. Like there was one psychiatrist who was really interested in affective disorders, and all the patients on the unit was diagnosed with an affective disorder and was put on Elavil, which probably isn't used anymore. Secondly, I found that there was a high incidence of auditory processing disorders with the psychiatric patients that I saw, that they had a difficult time processing what was said to them, and that was much of their difficulties. So I wonder what your thoughts are about those two issues.
Thank you, Roger. Thomas Szasz.
Yeah.
I was surprised that he came up. Libertarians loved him for many years. Hungarian, who wrote a very famous book that kind of led to deinstitutionalization too. It was part of that sort of broader movement. What do you think of Thomas Szasz?
Well, I think he was one of the first authors I found my way to back when I was in my kind of waking up period. Yeah. There is a strong libertarian critique to make of the kind of psychiatric power, broadly speaking, you could say, that we've imbued mental health professionals with this tremendous power to strip people of civil liberties, to, incarcerate people against their will because they might become a threat to themselves, to forcibly drug people. There's and Szasz in his many books, he wrote so many books over the years. I think there's a really important, I think he's one piece of a much bigger puzzle. I think his kind of libertarian analysis, while really important, especially around civil liberties, I think, maybe didn't focus so much on the broader social.
Correct.
The role that society itself plays in why people go crazy in the first place. But yeah, I met him. I got to see him speak right before he died, and briefly met him back in 2011, maybe. And I remember being very awestruck by the opportunity to meet him. And I think to your second question, you make a really good point that the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the so-called Bible of psychiatry, we all speak for myself. I just assumed during all the years that I identified with the diagnoses in it, that it was this valid scientific text that had been rigorously researched, and they must have done serious science somewhere. Otherwise, why would this text basically be at the heart of the entire, of every facet of the mental health industry, from billing, insurance billing, to research, to getting access to therapy. But it actually, in truth, lacks interrelator reliability, which basically means that the same person might get various different diagnoses from different psychiatrists. It's not a reliable text in that sense. It's because it's so subjective, based on the person, the so-called patient, how they're feeling, how they're describing what they're feeling. But it's also based on the subjective opinion of the diagnosing clinician. And so I think it's important to really draw attention to that, because a lot of us just assume it's this scientific process, but it's not. And that could have serious implications for you if you're not aware of that. Yeah.
Well, I will say this. We have Laura Delano on to give us her ideas about mental health. And on the way out, I'm going to say one thing and say, I have changed my mind on Thomas Szasz, and I want reinstitutionalization, because I read The Subways in New York and I'm like, oh, we're in a bad, what happened? I was civil liberties, you can't, against people's will, you can't put them in. And now I'm like, I don't know.
It's such what went wrong there is so complicated. A lot of it was about not actually ever implementing the community-based supports that were promised to be made. I mean, deinstitutionalization was largely driven by the arrival of psychiatric drugs themselves. So it was this idea that,
true.
We have these amazing miracle pills now, we can clear out the wards. And the promise was, and I can't remember the name of the law that JFK passed in the 63, maybe it was, that was meant to implement, okay, we're getting people out, and here's where they're going to go. Yeah. And here's all the support in the community. That never really came to be.
No, they decided to go onto the F train. That's where, I don't know if JFK had any interest in them going on the A train and the F train, but that's where they are mostly. Now, Laura Delano, the book is Unshrunk, a story of psychiatric treatment resistance. Go out and buy it. Even if you are on the opposite side of this, it's a great read. And she's a great person. So stop being a jerk in the comments. What is wrong with you people? You're psychos.
It's okay that you're angry. I totally get it. And if I could just quickly make, if anyone out there watching this is like, what the fuck? Yeah. I'm freaking out, or I'm, what if my meds might not be helping me? Our nonprofit Inner Compass Initiative, our whole purpose is to help people get straightforward information about the medications, about how to safely taper off the medications. If you decide that's what you want for yourself, there's a whole community of people helping one another. Just know that it's really risky to start a psychiatric drug and to stop one. It's something to take really seriously and to take a lot of time to really think through and prepare for carefully. Because just because you realize that your med might not be helping you, doesn't mean to just stop it. It's really dangerous. And there's a lot of useful information that we have for free that anyone can access to learn more about what that's like. And that's not me telling you to go off your meds, angry people. Well,
if you want, reach out to Laura Delano. Don't reach out to me. It's not that I don't care. I can't do anything. I can't help you. I can barely help myself. Good Lord, I'm going to go weep after this show. All right. I have some time to weep until not next Thursday, on Thursday. 2 days away. Another episode of this fine program. Who's the guest? I'm going to keep that to myself. It'll make you come back. But in the meantime, make sure to go to thefire.org/Moynihan and sign up for the newsletter. We get all the latest news and information on free speech struggles throughout this country. All right, guys, See you on Thursday.